If you are receiving this transmission, you are the resistance.
Welcome back to the War Room. I'm your host, Jake Lloyd. For the rest of this segment, we've had some great callers discussing some very interesting, very monumental stuff about Syria right now, about the current state of world affairs. Everything is once again tied up in the Middle East, as it has been for who knows how long. We've been doing this for millennia now. I want to thank you, though. We're about to be joined by Matt Bracken here momentarily. I want to thank you for all of your support and ask for your continued support. Live, but thrilling indeed. So now we're going to go to Matt Bracken. I want to thank him for joining us. He's going to be our guest for the rest of this hour. And Mr. Bracken, I wanted to ask you, we've been talking a lot about Syria for this past 30 minutes or so. I wanted to ask your opinion on that in a moment, but for now I want to get your opinion on Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He's reforming the government. It's a reformation of sorts, but I want to get your opinion on how you think that he's going to actually affect the world affairs, the world interaction with Saudi Arabia. Do you think that it's going to be for better or for worse, or do you think that this is just kind of a false attempt at, or a false display of moderation of Islam?
Well, there's really no way to reform or moderate Islam because it comes straight from the Quran. All you can do is have autocratic leaders that occasionally act in a more secular manner. But loosening up in Saudi Arabia, I think, is obviously, well, he had a coup against his own royal family, locked up, hundreds of people, and took them out of the picture, which is not making him popular. But what I think is happening is he's gearing up for the big act, the big play, which is coming soon. The gas attack, which if it even happened or if it was a false flag, that's not the real game that's at play here. The real game is an alliance between Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states plus Israel. That's the Sunnis plus Israel plus the USA versus Russia and Iran and the Shia world, including Assad and the Alawites and the Shias, who at the Syrian end, it's more secular, obviously, than it is in Iran, but they are allied. And the real matter here is the Saudis, the Gulf states, and us. They want to put a natural gas pipeline that basically runs north-south to Turkey, then to Europe, and it would go straight through Syria. At the same time, the Russians and the Iranians want to control all of the real estate from Iran east-west going to the Mediterranean, where the Russians have deep water naval ports. So the Russians have always wanted the warm water ports, the ice-free warm water ports. An alliance with Iran gives them ports now on the Mediterranean. Well, they have their own Syrian agreement, but they now have ports in the Mediterranean and in the Indian Ocean, Iran. But this is a huge conflict. I mean, whoever controls Syria is going to either be able to block Iran and Russia from their east-west military highway and rail links, or alternatively, the other guys, Russia and Iran, will be able to block Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states from putting in their natural gas pipeline. So it's like a crisscross, and that's the conflict. What we're being sold about the gas attack is just propaganda for the masses to get us stirred up to go back in and fight again. But I'm old enough to have remembered this going back. I was a kid, but I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin incident in '64 was used as a pretext to get America involved in a land war in Vietnam. The first Persian Gulf War, the so-called weapons of mass destruction, we were guaranteed, all the intelligence agencies, were positive. In that same war, we had the Kuwaiti ambassador to Washington's daughter go on TV, I think on 60 Minutes even, crying about the babies being thrown out of their incubators. She was in Washington the whole time. It was pure propaganda. This is how they rile us up for war. That's why InfoWars is so important, because even on, for example, Fox News, they're a little bit hesitant about calling this a false flag operation. Sort of the patriotic war drum beats, and you have to salute and get in line. Tucker Carlson, notably, is not getting in line, but most of them are. They just are saying, darn it, that Assad, he's so horrible, he's a madman, he's gassing his own people, which makes absolutely no sense. But at the bigger level, you mentioned earlier World War I, and it really does seem like the big empire forces are coming to a clash here. And notably, Russia and Iran, China in the background is going to consolidate Asia when this all breaks loose. And then the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and America with their natural gas pipeline to Europe. They both can't exist in the same place. One or the other alliance is going to control Syria and control either the gas pipeline, which won't be built, or the military highway for Russia and Iran, which won't be built. That's why we're in the situation of supporting Sunni Islamic terrorists who are, as long as they are in a presence in Syria, will prevent Assad and the Russians from building that highway. That's why we're in the terrible situation of pretending that al-Nusra and the Free Syrian Army are not just sheep-dipped ISIS, which is really what they are, the white helmets, et cetera. And going through recent history with Islamic war, we've seen false flags before, and not only in Syria, where I think Mattis has admitted that last year's so-called gas attack that led to the Tomahawk launches, there was no proof that it was done by Assad. We launched missiles based on no proof. I hope we don't go to world war based on a false flag operation. But it seems like the forces are just coming together like, the tectonic plates, getting ready to throw up a new mountain range or some kind of giant earthquake. You mentioned earlier World War I and Archduke Ferdinand. The assassination plot had actually failed. And the assassin had quit for the day, was sitting in a bar, and the Archduke's motorcade made a wrong turn and drove right in front of his outdoor cafe bar. And the assassin was able to jump up with a pistol and shoot him. It was meant to happen. These forces were just going to happen. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Middle East now. We don't know what the spark is going to be, but I think it's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Absolutely prophetic, Matt Bracken. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You touched briefly on Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. I want to ask you a specific question. You couldn't have taken it to a better place, exactly where I wanted it to go. This is the War Room. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
If you are
Specials. So, Matt Bracken, that was an excellent, like I said, an excellent breakdown and a summarization of what's going on, what the real motivation behind the Syrian conflict is. And I wanted to zero in because you really went to the place that I wanted to take that in the last segment. But I wanted to zero in on the new alliance that's kind of springing up between, like you said, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, America and Israel, because we have Saudi Arabia in search of White House support during these purges going on within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's government. And in return, Israel wants Saudi Arabia to push Palestine to peace talks. We see Saudi Arabia attended a conference with Israel there, while Palestine was not, which is practically unheard of. Most Arab states will not attend a conference with Israel if Palestine isn't there. Do you think that this alliance will see a paradigm shift of relations within the Middle East, or do you think that it'll be more of the same with just a slightly different dynamic?
I think that Saudi Arabia's overtures to Israel, as well as King Solomon's overtures to Trump, with Trump going there and the king coming here, this is part of a big diplomatic shuffle and reordering. And the negotiations, the trade-offs are, I think that Trump believes that we can't be overtly allied with Saudi Arabia while they have such a horrific human rights record, particularly in regards to how they treat women, which is basically harsh Sharia, Quranic Islam. But, it's really all about who controls the cameras and the news feed. If the same network cameras put brave reporters into Yemen, they would see what is a human rights violation, really a definition of genocide, which is a blockade, a starvation blockade against civilians. So our wonderful allies, the Saudis, the now liberal Saudis, are doing a starvation blockade. The war is already going on between the Saudis and Iran, because the Yemen is an ally of Iran, or at least the Houthi areas. But putting a starvation blockade on civilians, as long as there's no cameras, we don't care. It's like Somalia. They're starving, the cameras arrive, it becomes an issue. So, yeah, I think that it's part of a trade-off. And what it warns me is that Trump is gearing up, and Israel and America are gearing up to go to war with, alongside the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia versus Russia and Iran. And these are big stakes. These are very big stakes at play, huge. And I wanted to mention also, this popped into my head over the break. I watched the very first question out of the gate at Sarah Huckabee Sanders' press conference, 4 o'clock Eastern today. First question, I was, as they say, gobsmacked. First question out of the gate by Fox reporter, I think is John Roberts, was about the white helmets, and was the gas attack a false flag attack? Now, this just shocked me, because I would never have expected this from a Fox reporter. I don't know if he was off the reservation, or if this is now okay to talk about at Fox, since their main guy, the 9 o'clock guy, Tucker Carlson, he's been talking about a possibly not a real event, this gas attack, going to war on false pretenses. Now John Roberts put it on the table. First question. Of course, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she said, oh, no, our intel people are really sure it was a gas attack. But we heard that before Iraq won, with Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. We heard it last year with the gas attack that Mattis says there's no proof. So over and over again, we've had the intel community lie to us for political reasons. The impetus is towards war, and the intel we're fed is just propaganda designed to stir us up and motivate us to go to war. But,
right, and like, to play off of what you said about the alliance between the Gulf states, America, and Israel now, Tucker asked, I believe he was a representative, he said, what interest does the United States have in going into Syria? Why would we do this? And I don't even really remember the rest of the response, because it started out with, well, if you care about Israel, ... So it's this push, this concerted push, because of the alliances we have, not so much because of any actual American interest. There's no pragmatic strategy to have America involved in the no reasonable pragmatic strategy. Of course, there's actual reasons, like you broke down with the oil and gas pipelines going through.
Yeah, in Great Britain in the 19th century, they used to call it the Great Game, which was playing off the Russians versus the Ottoman Empire, et cetera. And Britain would come in and out depending on their own national interests, primarily trade interests, and keeping India, which then included East and West Pakistan, keeping that in the empire. But today, the great game, I think, is the natural gas pipeline running north-south through Syria versus the Russia-Iran axis, super military highway running from the Mediterranean to Iran. These are big, you could say it's our national interest to not allow that military highway, weapons and soldiers, everything else going back and forth from the Mediterranean, giving Iran essentially a seaport on the Mediterranean with Russian ships there to make sure we don't attack it, lest we go to world war with Russia. So, yeah, you could make that argument. I just wish it was an honest argument. I just wish we weren't being stampeded into, potentially World War III on false pretenses. And I have to give credit to Alex Jones and InfoWars. I have no doubt that John Roberts' question today at the press conference about the Al-Nusra white helmet false flag, that question never would have ever come up if it wasn't for InfoWars. And it shows the impact that InfoWars is having. It is having an impact.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's true. We do push the Overton window in that direction, I believe. The next, and that's phenomenal. I wasn't even aware that question was asked. That's very that's very hopeful to hear that.
She slapped it down, but she slapped it down, not rudely, but John Roberts put it on the table on, all networks.
Which is excellent.
Most people have never heard of the white helmets.
Right. Well, most people haven't. That's the thing. And the people that have definitely haven't heard of their connections to the Syrian rebels and other terrorist groups in the region that go by other names but are effectively Al-Qaeda in Syria.
Right.
One of the topics that I've been fairly interested in looking into is, as you've heard, Iran is threatening to restart their nuclear program as if they're not secretly moving forward with it already. And Saudi Arabia says if Iran develops nuclear weapons, then Saudi Arabia will too. How do you feel that will? Do you feel like that will be accelerated by the current Syrian conflict if that escalates, or do you think? I guess my question is, what do you think is the future of an arms race of sorts in the Middle East?
Well, on the outside, there's a timeline which is, the intel agencies all making their best estimates about when will Iran test a nuke, a deliverable nuke. They already have missiles that can hit all the European capitals, or most of them. Maybe not Britain, but they can already hit, Italy, etc., Germany. So when they can put a nuke on it, that's the big game changer. And there might be a calculation that as dangerous as a war is now with Iran in Syria and their Russian proxy overlords, that somehow we can crush Assad's military ambitions, keep our Islamist Sunni terrorists under some kind of control, where the Saudis will vouch for them and be able to build their gas pipeline north-south through Syria, and we'll be able to stymie that Russian military highway east-west. So there might be a calculation, as bad and dangerous as this is to go to war now, trying to avoid war with Russia, it's better than waiting for Iran to get nukes.
Absolutely. Very, very fascinating, Mr. Matt Bracken. We greatly appreciate your input as always. You can find him at enemiesforeignanddomestic.com. Please do. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jake Lloyd. This has been the War Room. Tune in tomorrow.
If you are receiving this transmission, you are